Hey, what's up guys? So we're back with another Fallout lore video. If you're new channel, welcome. We're going to be checking out another video by the channel Echo. So shout out and credit goes to Echo for this video, and he's been doing an amazing job. I really like his videos, and I hope he keeps up with them because I really like the videos. So Echo, if you are watching this somehow, because I'm a really small channel, so I don't know if you are, well then again, actually, I can't say I'm a small channel because I actually have the same amount of subscribers as you, so, but anyways. If you're watching this, keep up your great work, man. Dude, you're doing an amazing job, and I'm learning a lot from you, so thank you. But anyways, we're going to be checking out a video called Every Single Pre-Apocalypse War in Fallout Explained. So, I'm guessing he's going to be jumping into like the wars that happened in the Fallout universe before the bombs dropped. The only one I am really tracking of in this universe was... I forgot the name of the war, but it was the one that happened in Alaska where the Chinese invaded and where the United States military really used like the power armors to push them back or something like that. But besides that, I don't really know much because like I said, when it comes to this universe, I'm a complete noob. So without anything else, let's just jump into the video and see what kind of pre-apocalypse wars Echo will be describing, telling us and describing.
The Fallout universe begins after the world ends. But before the bombs dropped, the planet was already tearing itself apart in a decades-long struggle that turned nations against each other, bled the world dry of oil and uranium, and set the stage for a nuclear apocalypse. This age of upheaval was known as the Resource Wars. And if you thought the Wasteland was violent, wait until you see what led to it. From the early 2050s right up until 2077 and the end of the world,
hey, that's 50 years from now. 40 to 50 years from now, so better get ready.
This is the account of every pre-apocalypse war in Fallout. By 2051, the oil fields of Texas had run dry, and the reserves in Alaska were only beginning to be drilled, leading the United States government to look further afield to satisfy the nation's ever-growing thirst for oil. Coincidentally, just as the US was beginning to run low, new reserves were found under the territory of its southern neighbor, Mexico. The United States government proposed outrageous trade deals with the Mexican state, looking to buy up the rights to these oil fields. When the Mexicans refused, the furious US imposed crippling trade sanctions on Mexico, effectively cutting the nation off from all outside trade and throwing it into a destructive economic tailspin. As poverty and chaos gripped Mexico, the Americans graciously stepped in to restore order, invading the country from the north under the guise of a peacekeeping operation.
Interesting. They didn't step in and just like go through Mexico and help that. They started in the areas that had the oil fields. Interesting.
The country from the north under the guise of a peacekeeping operation. Though the defenders fought valiantly.
Oh yeah, the second Mexican-American War. Yeah, because there was a very first one, and that's how, like, if I remember correctly, that's how the United States, I think it was called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where the United States bought many of the states. Well, they weren't states at the time, but the territory that is California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, and I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it's all of Texas, but like a huge chunk of Texas from Mexico, and that's what they came today. And if I remember correctly, at that time, it was like $15 million. So that's a lot of money in today's time.
Brilliantly, their now isolated and poor country stood no chance against the invaders, who rolled over them in a matter of weeks. With its southern border secured and expanded,
barely a war.
The United States could guarantee a steady supply of oil for at least a little longer, with American megacorporations like Poseidon Energy stepping in to ensure the black gold kept flowing back to the home front.
Poseidon Oil. What I noticed, there are a lot of like Greek gods and Greek mythology names here. So there's like Poseidon Oil, there's like Helios 1, things like that. But I never knew the name of the oil company was called Poseidon Oil.
Though not a long conflict, nor as bloody as the ones that would follow, the Second Mexican-American War set a dangerous example for the rest of the world. Invasions launched for glory and plunder were not only profitable, but may become required for a nation's very survival. The European Commonwealth was a band of European countries united by the very real threat of resource shortages. Following the Americans' playbook, the Commonwealth became more aggressive in its negotiations, beginning to bully its more vulnerable neighbors. When a coalition of oil-producing countries in the Middle East began hiking up the price of oil due to their own dwindling supply, the Europeans responded with violence, launching an invasion that lasted 8 long years.
Wow.
From 2052 to 2060, the deserts were lit by the flash of gunfire and choked by the plumes of burning oil wells. By the war's end, both sides were totally spent, with the Commonwealth collapsing completely due to endless infighting. Their opponents were no better off, with many of their major cities wiped off the map. But despite their efforts, it was all for nothing, as the tanks, aircraft, and warships deployed guzzled far more fuel than was won in that pointless campaign.
I really like the designs of like these vehicles, but also on top of that, right here, the price of oil literally going from as low as it looks like maybe like $400 or $350 all the way up to like a skyrocketing $1,500. But also on top of that, he did mention that the allies and of Commonwealth, they pretty much like turned on each other. So I mean, that's the tale as old as time. Your allies for one moment, and then they become your sworn enemies.
Deployed, guzzled loss to sabotage and a near complete destruction of the region's infrastructure. It was the burning of the Middle East's Gulf states that truly tipped the pre-war world into a panic, with the most easily accessible oil reserves in the world now completely depleted and millions killed in the fighting. From 2060 to 2066, the situation worsened. Highways and streets were left empty as gasoline became too precious to waste on personal transport. Rolling blackouts gripped every nation on Earth as they struggled to build enough nuclear reactors to keep up with demand. All the while, a new plague was sweeping the globe, which, while not especially deadly, further isolated people from their neighbors, deepening the paranoia and distrust already on the rise. Though it had a high survival rate, the true casualty of the disease was the fabric of the United States, which was torn apart through quarantines and forced relocations, citing the plague as the cause. In 2066, the American government announced a complete as the cause. In 2066...
So I'm guessing this is the war that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. Like, they said that it was fought in Alaska. It was the Chinese that invaded, so I think this is it.
The American government announced a complete halt on all energy or oil exports worldwide, essentially cutting itself off from international trade. Being the owner of the Alaskan oil fields, the last major reserves left on Earth, the United States was effectively dooming many of the countries beyond its borders, including its main geopolitical rival, the People's Republic of China. Though China had been able to get by using its extensive coal reserves in the past, they had recently run out, sending its society into a slow decline. As if to add insult to injury, the US unveiled the first portable fusion cells to the public shortly after it cut off trade, meaning the miracle technology wouldn't be shared with any of their struggling neighbors. In the face of this existential threat, the Chinese government had two options: to accept their fate and face total collapse, or to invade Alaska and take the wells by force.
Guess
In
what they
December
chose?
2066, they chose to invade, with an enormous naval force smashing through the defenders of Anchorage, the state's capital and the headquarters of its fossil fuel industry. As they pushed further and further through Alaska, the Americans were unable to respond, both due to the speed and ferocity of the attackers, as well as the reluctance of the Canadian government at the idea of the war crossing its borders. Though they had accepted the construction of the Alaskan pipelines for a small cut of its precious fuel, the Canadians were much less eager to allow American troops and heavy weapons to trample through their country. Though they voiced their concerns, they were ultimately ignored by their southern neighbors and had no choice but to back down as more and more war material was transported to the front lines. Chief among these supplies were the first suits of T-45 power armor. Pushed through by a shaken federal government, the researchers at West Tech produced this early model of armor as a stopgap against the slow, grinding Chinese advance. It proved effective, with the bulky but strong and heavily armored suits multiplying the effectiveness of an individual soldier many times over. Able to wield powerful weapons systems like miniguns and rocket launchers with ease, the mobility problems that plagued the T-45 were deemed acceptable drawbacks. Once the initial shock of their introduction wore off, however,
look at that armor.
The Chinese realized they could disable power-armored soldiers with anti-tank ordnance, and began upgrading their own arsenal. Fighting through bitterly cold temperatures, both sides settled into a stalemate. Dominated by brutal trench warfare, neither side could gain an edge. However, now that Anchorage's resources were being directed back to the Chinese mainland, their own immediate collapse was delayed, while the further development of fusion technology propped up the faltering American side. The war carried on this way for 3 years, with neither side gaining much ground, at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. With oil from Alaska no longer flowing south, the American government decided to use the influence over Canada it gained through the pipeline to begin plundering its allies' resources. Huge swaths of Canadian territory were stripped and polluted by the endless hunger of the war machine at its doorstep. By 2069, the country was little more than a colony to its southern neighbor, and was buckling under the strain of its endless extraction. These resources, including uranium, valuable metals, and rare earth minerals, were funneled into ever more daring military research and production projects, including the creation of combat robots such as assaultrons and sentry bots, both of which would wreak havoc on the enemy in the years to come.
I remember this. It was in the Fallout videos that I saw from Sodas, but I just didn't know what they were, and they look pretty intimidating.
The Chinese would respond in kind, deploying a vast array of biological and chemical weapons in Alaska, as well as constructing an elaborate network of spies and informants to infiltrate the mainland United States. This policy of spying and
it's like the Cold War all over again, but instead of Russia, it's China.
Sabotage would indirectly result in some of the darkest chapters of the war. In the midst of the paranoia over possible communist spies, millions of Chinese Americans were imprisoned without trial. Though the process did end up capturing a few legitimate spies, they were far outweighed by the huge number of innocent Americans confined to makeshift internment camps built all across the states.
So that kind of reminds me of what happened back in World War II. The same thing happened to the Japanese Americans, because there were legitimately Japanese spies in Hawaii, and I think there was some reported in Los Angeles as well, if I remember correctly, because there was a book I'm reading called Ghosts of Honolulu, and there was a Japanese spy in the U.S. Navy, and he was reporting back what the U.S. Navy looks like in Pearl Harbor and things like that. But also what I learned in high school was there were internment camps for all Japanese Americans. Yes, many of them were innocent, but unfortunately, just because you're Japanese and you look like the enemy, what the enemy looks like, you were unfortunately detained into these camps. Many died from starvation, disease, and things like that. So it was just really unfortunate. But I forgot what the Japanese camp was called. Internment camp. Manzanar. Yeah, the one. That was the Japanese internment camp that we, Japanese American internment camp that we learned a lot in high school. It was called Manzanar. I remember now. So, I guess either way, no matter what kind of war happens, this seems to be a common factor.
Some were even used as medical and experimental test subjects,
of course,
such as those shipped in train cars to Little Yangtze in Big Mountain. The conditions were so inhumane that the prisoners would risk anything to escape. The scientists' solution? The creation of the first explosive collars, devices that would become associated with slavery and misery all across the wasteland. In 2072, tensions finally boiled over on the home front, with many cities in occupied Canada breaking out into rioting and chaos, only to be brutally crushed by the United States military. The sabotage of the Alaska pipeline was the final straw, and the US finally invaded their former ally. Some of the first imagery in the entire series features power-armored soldiers keeping the peace in the aftermath of the brutal takeover. The horrible footage coming out of Canada combined with the whole brutal takeover.
The
horrible footage coming out of Canada,
he's just waving,
combined with the wholesale imprisonment of American citizens, finally ignited the fury of the American people, who took to the streets in protest of their own government's heavy-handed approach. Far from backing off, the United States intensified the war by invading mainland China in 2074, hoping to take the pressure off the ongoing Alaskan campaign. Though they hoped it would bring a swift end to the war, the invasion only served to stretch the country's already strained resources, intensifying the public's calls for peace. All the while, scientists searched for alternative solutions to the stalemate, including some strange genetic tampering that would go on to produce the first death claws and the forced evolutionary virus, two of the series' most iconic features. Finally, after years of fighting, the introduction of the perfected T-51 power armor in 2076 began to turn the tide. More advanced than the T-45, these suits were capable of much greater flexibility and mobility, allowing their users to cover ground and reposition quickly. The Chinese lines began to crumble, culminating in the liberation of Anchorage in early 2077. Far from being a moment to relax and celebrate, these exhausted troops were immediately redeployed, both to the meat grinder in Asia, as well as back to the US mainland. Even with Alaska reclaimed and the front reinforced, the Chinese defenders dug in, leading to long, drawn-out campaigns all across the nation, from the Gobi Desert to the Yangtze River. The responsibility of those returning to the States would be even heavier, however. No longer would the veterans of Alaska be fighting the Chinese foe. Instead, they would be expected to turn their weapons on the very people they were supposedly protecting.
All
across the nation, the National Guard and other army units were being called upon to suppress the population. Riots over food shortages in major cities after supply lines broke down. Clashes over automation laying off hundreds of thousands from increasingly mechanized industries, and a complete lack of many consumer goods led to anarchy. When some of these soldiers refused to oppress their own countrymen, the situation only worsened, with the president declaring a state of martial law, completing the country's downward spiral into madness and forming a de facto dictatorship. One of the groups resisting the corruption of their government were the soldiers assigned to the Mariposa military base in California. Led by Captain Roger Maxson, these soldiers were shocked to discover that the scientists...
I know who he is. I saw him in the Fallout Faction Leader Explained video.
They were guarding were experimenting with FEV on human test subjects. Disgusted by their cruel disregard for the well-being of the subjects who were gathered from the government's internment camps, the soldiers executed the scientists soon after getting the full picture. Surprised by the military's silence regarding such a blatant mutiny, Maxson announced that he and his men would be occupying the base, and declared total independence from the United States. Amazingly, they received no reply. They really shouldn't have been surprised. To get a reply, someone needs to be there to pick up the phone.
Oh, so that's when it collapsed. By the time
the Mariposa Mutiny had happened, the upper levels of government and industry in the United States had all but abandoned their posts. With some fleeing to personal shelters, the majority relocated to the secret oil rig off the west coast, along with their most loyal soldiers and supporters.
So the Enclave.
This group of top-level politicians responsible for the wars would go on to form the Enclave, spreading fear and terror across the wasteland long after the pre-war United States was destroyed. On October 23, 2077, the time finally came. With the Chinese forces on the mainland crumbling and the American society struggling to prop up their war machine, the end of the Sino-American War, the Resource Wars, and every other worldwide conflict arrived. It's unknown who exactly struck first, but the fate of both nations and the entire world with them were sealed in hours. The bombs fell all over the world, and both sides, beaten and bloody as they were, collapsed under the strain of nuclear fire. The soldiers at Mariposa fled with their families to the bunker at Lost Hills to form the Brotherhood of Steel.
Yep.
The FEV mutants and Deathclaws spread across the freshly formed wastes, and the robots and energy weapons built for the old world wars have long since outlasted it. You might hope that these wonders of the old world would be put to better use than that for which they were designed. But as we all know,
they'll still be built for war.
In the world of Fallout, war never changes.
That was a really great video. I personally loved it. So it looks like the Sino-American War is the longest and was, I guess, the main topic of this video, because the second Mexican-American War and the Commonwealth War barely took up like 3 to 4 minutes, while the Sino-American War took up like literally 80% of the video. But I really liked it. I really enjoyed it, and it was great to go into detail. But every single one of the wars had one common reason: resource shortages. And as he said, that's why it's called the resource wars, of course, in case you guys are thinking like, no shit. But I mean, that's basically like one of the reasons why war happens. You know, to get more resources, take land, take oil, take valuable resources. And that's just how it is. But however, what I really noticed about this one was the Sino-American War. I didn't know that Alaska, they invaded Alaska because of the oil reserves that was located there. And also what I didn't know was that the war caused the United States to annex Canada. So I guess now Canada is part of the United States, but I'm also assuming that the United States kept Mexico. So Mexico would also be part of the United States. So the entire North America is the United States. But either way, this was really great, and I really enjoyed this video. So shout out and credit goes to Echo again for doing an amazing job of depicting and also explaining this video really well. So Echo, well done. So that's all I got for today, guys. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that notification bell so you know when I drop another video. And also shout out to all my members, subscribers, viewers. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your support, guys. I really do appreciate it. So without anything else, see you guys next time.